Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's August 28th, and this is another SIG CLI meeting. My name is Machin, and I'll be your host. We have short list of announcements for today. Code freeze for Kubernetes 1.16 is due tomorrow. I haven't heard about any changes with that regards. So make sure that all the PRs that you care about are tagged by tomorrow afternoon Pacific time, if I remember correctly. Sean was our test on call for the past 2 weeks, and I'll be taking this privilege in the upcoming 2 weeks, but let's hear from Sean if there were any bigger issues. I remember there was one that was to be solved on the Google side.
Yeah, so we've been struggling to keep the tests and the clusters being able to be brought up at the latest version of the GKE, and that's still the case. And I don't have any other updates for that.
Okay, I'll keep that one in mind when when doing my duties over the next period of time.
So yeah, I'll have to it'll have to be somebody within Google probably to push it forward to get.
Okay. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. Did you say something, Phil?
I was just asking, is there like a tracking issue?
I don't have one. I'll create one.
Yeah, just create one and then add it to the notes, and then we can manage that.
Okay, perfect. Quick reminder, KubeCon North America will be happening in San Diego, November 17th and 18th throughout the rest of the week. But we will be also hosting face-to-face sessions for SIG CLI specifically. And we applied for a 90-minute session for SIG CLI overview during the main part of the KubeCon North America, and during which we are hoping to basically touch base with our developers and end users, and we'll be hosting some kind of a live event, and depending on what people will be interested to hear about, we'll be covering the topic, whether that's a direction SIG CLI is going. If people will be interested in how to develop plugins, we'll cover that one. We will have 90 minutes, that's sufficient amount of time to cover at least a couple of topics. So if you can come up with, feel free to show up and ask us any kind of easy or tough questions with regards to SIG CLI or any of the projects that we have under our umbrella. Okay, with that, I think we can move to the topics section. And the first topic is kubectl copy issues. So let me quickly introduce you the discussion that we're having. So basically over the past 6 months or so, but definitely since the security audit started in Kubernetes at the beginning of this year, we've noticed a significant amount of CVE grade issues with kubectl copy. None of the other commands had any issues during that period. Kubectl copy had numerous issues, and it required several people, including myself, Jordan, who's on the call, Sean, Phil, and a couple others who are not on this call, to invest significant amount of time to debug those issues, write proper tests, and most importantly, fix them. Unfortunately, during the fix process, we had to limit the functionality of kubectl copy one way or the other usually. And that in turn returned to us as a new PR, adding back some kind of missing functionality. And usually the missing functionality was covering some edge cases such as colon and file names, such as handling symlinks. But yet at the same time, that corner edge case functionality could easily be used to exploit kubectl command, kubectl copy command. So after several discussions, we decided that we would like to completely remove the kubectl copy command. We brought this topic into discussion. We sent an email to both SIG CLI and SIG architecture asking for an approval from the usual deprecation process so that we are able to remove kubectl copy command. I've linked, or that wasn't actually in, but there's a link in the agenda notes to the thread. It's getting pretty long by now, and there were multiple topics discussed throughout the mailing list thread. To summarize the thread in simple words is that we will not be able to remove kubectl copy command yet. The majority of people agrees that we need to create a kube enhancement proposal, a CAP, to be able to do so. And we'll see how the discussions will proceed from that. In the meantime, though, we still would like to improve the current problems that we have with kubectl and ensure that no further CVE issues are happening against kubectl copy. So Jordan listed down alternatives for the current process. These include that we will go through a regular deprecation process, which is either 12 months or 2 releases, whichever is longer. In our case, since we're releasing every quarter, that usually means an entire year of supporting kubectl copy command. The other possibility is that we will limit the scope of copy command and provide users with alternatives in the copy command so that they can use tar command through kubectl exec to cover the edge cases such as the colon in file names or wildcards or basically downloading executable files and whatever you are capable of doing with the regular tar. Does anyone have any questions, discussions, ideas about the topic, or feels that want to add something to the discussions?
Like, do we before we deprecate, or rather, do we want to immediately put in messaging for people who run the command to just say this command is considered less secure than the alternative of running, this shell pipe, and then
Yes.
encourage people not to do it?
I will be opening PRs against all the supported kubectl versions, which is probably until 1.14. And we will most probably limit the functionality because we are convinced that this will be the best approach.
So just to clarify a couple of things, this is a discussion that we've been trying to have for a while. We were kind of perpetually in a state of addressing a security issue. And the thought was like, as soon as this one gets resolved and the releases get pushed out, then we'll start the discussion about like, how can we deal with this in a long-term way? And then before that discussion could get started, another security issue would get reported, and we'd be like back to trying to figure out like, what's the scope, what's the impact, get it fixed, get it backported. And we're like, all right, as soon as this one is done, then we'll start this conversation. And like, as Maciej said, literally for the last 6 months, like every month or every month and a half, there's been an issue reported. A lot of them variations of the same issue. And so for the people who have been involved in fixing those and triaging them and dealing with the fallout of them, this discussion didn't come out of nowhere, but for people who weren't, I can see how it seemed that way. Linking to kind of the history of the CVEs, there's actually another one that's been reported that's effectively the same type of issue, symlink handling type of thing. That's kind of the context of where this is coming from. So it seems like the three options are do nothing, like continue fixing things piecemeal, and
not an acceptable answer, right?
I think reputationally and like user expectation wise, it is not okay to continue as is. The most what's the right word? The most drastic response would be to say there are alternatives to this command. We shouldn't have this command at all. That would disrupt a lot of people's use of the command who don't actually care about these like advanced symlink edge cases. They're just using it to pull like a log file out, and that's a not unreasonable thing to want to do. And so I'm in favor of the fix for the current security issue being drop symlink support. I think we've tried really hard to support symlinks in a safe way and have failed over the last 6 months. So I think dropping symlink support is a reasonable balance between letting users do sort of normal pull a log file out, pull a set of files out types of things, while definitively closing the door on this category of vulnerability. Once the current issue is addressed, then having the discussion like, does this command belong in kube control? If it does, are we actually supporting this for users well? Like, does it work on Windows? Does it work in containers that don't have tar installed? The answer is no. Like, is this sort of half functional command a reasonable user experience? Or do people running this command expect it to work anywhere Kubernetes works? Like, are they expecting the container runtime to provide these capabilities? So those things weren't really considered when the command was added. It was just sort of this is clever, you can do this, and it kind of works. And so I think those are the types of questions that we need to ask when we're deciding whether to support this long-term or start the deprecation period. And the urgency of removing it immediately is lowered if we kind of define clearly, this is what this command is for and what it does, this is not what it's for. If you want these advanced use cases, use tar directly, which you can do today, like going back many, many versions of kube control. So there's no, it's not like people have to wait for the latest version to start making use of that mechanism.
And I think, like, yeah, today we should start out regardless just printing a message suggesting people do that as the recommended alternative. Because if we want to communicate to users what the command is about, probably if we just tell them use tar if it doesn't do exactly what you want, that should be sufficient.
And then I linked to a couple pull requests that have been opened that are wanting to add back functionality that I would consider dangerous. So things like wildcard expansion and permission preserving, so you could create executable files locally. So getting feedback on those in particular and kind of clarifying in the command what is this intended for, and limiting it to that. So I agree with the mailing list comments that any exceptions to deprecation policies should be captured in a KEP. Like the deprecation policy predated KEPs. And so it said, if we're going to make an exception for reasons that this policy doesn't foresee, that'll be done like in discussion with SIG leaders and people, the maintainers of that area. And so that discussion needs to happen. The place that happens today is a KEP. So that makes sense to me. And I wouldn't announce any kind of deprecation in 116 before we figure out whether we actually need to deprecate it or want to deprecate it. So let's not disrupt users more than we need to before we figure out what the right thing to do is.
Does anyone think we shouldn't be telling users to just use tar?
So, I mean, if you're in a command line environment where you don't have tar locally, that won't work for you, right? So if you're running
locally, it's not a problem because we are using the Go built-in tar.
No, I'm saying
today, but if we said like
Oh.
pipe, just use kubectl as a transport and pipe to tar, that wouldn't work today if you don't have tar locally.
Right. I mean, leave the command in, but tell them to do tar. Right. Like what
the first step would be just to direct them to tar for use cases that the built-in one doesn't support. Things like symlinks and permission preserving and wildcard, crazy wildcard globbing. Like if this isn't, if what you want is tar behavior and this isn't getting it to you, use tar. The goal of this command is not to expand to
right
equivalent.
Copy a single non-directory file from one place to another.
Single non-directory file you can just do with cat and pipe it directly to the file. Like you don't need
Why
to.
don't we do that with log files then, right?
Yeah. I would probably start slow with what we direct users to do. So let's figure out if this functionality makes sense, or like Tim Hawken on the thread was talking about, like, is this something we want to teach container runtime to be able to do, like copy a file out? Until we actually decide those things, I wouldn't like push people away from using the command prematurely. So saying if you want more advanced functionality like permission preserving or symlink, whatever, here's how you can achieve it. That's not going to get built into copy. And then regroup on the cat for like what should this behavior be long term.
But in the short term, still we want to limit the scope of the kubectl copy so that we have the time to actually write the cap in the first place, because usually it's, from my experience, fixing any of the CVEs required us about a week of effort.
At least, yeah. I mean, we have a responsibility to users to, if we say this is a reasonable thing for them to run on their local machine, like make it reasonable. And like I said, we've tried to preserve the symlink following for like a year now and failed repeatedly. So
Yeah.
I think Tim Allclair's PR to drop symlink support is the responsible thing to do, and likely does not impact many use cases. I've never actually seen someone using kubectl CP to pull out things depending on symlink structure. All the uses I've seen are like grabbing data files, a log file, something like that.
Yeah, same for me.
We can, we can put a warning message in about that too, right? Like if we just communicate and say like when they run the command that this functionality has been removed.
I mean, we can extend the help command. Currently, the help command for kubectl copy clearly states that you need to have tar in the container. Right next to it, we could say that the current functionality of kubectl supports only regular files. If you want to work with something more, if you need to cover advanced use cases, here are kubectl exec alternatives that you might consider. And
can we identify?
What again? Sorry.
The thing that removes symlink support, does that identify what's a symlink and is not a symlink?
Yeah.
So we can print out like maybe it does. It could print out like a warning message to standard error, right? Saying we're not copying this file. Here's why. Here's the alternative.
We already are.
Okay.
We are already printing warnings or saying users, oh, this file was skipped because it's a symlink, and this symlink is trying to escape the destination directory.
Okay.
That is a functionality that was added as one of the fix for the CVEs already.
Yeah, so strengthening that and just saying symlinks in general, we will warn about. And I like the idea of saying we don't deal with symlinks if you really need this. Like if you expected this and need this, here's what to do instead.
Yeah, that's reasonable, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think putting, if let's say, there's 10 users that use this functionality in the world, putting the entire rest of our user base at risk, just so that we don't get one or two bad tweets is
especially when there is a reasonable alternative
right, exactly.
can use on any of the versions of kubectl.
Right. Yeah, that seems pretty clear.
Yeah. We will need to be really clear in the release notes for that fix that if you are depending on this, here's what you should do. And for everyone else, they can now stop worrying about like random things getting written to random places on disk when they run CP and they weren't expecting it.
Okay, I think we beat to death the kubectl copy topic, unless someone else has any questions or concerns with regards to this. Okay, hearing none, we can jump to the next topic, which is a feature request to support home.kube config.d configuration directory. Is the author of the proposal on the call? Okay, hearing none, in that case, I'm gonna skip this topic, and I'll include it next time.
Just some quick context on that. That particular feature, I asked the creator to present it to us to actually try to convince us that that was something that was needed and useful. Brian Grant gave him pointers to about 6 other issues, and he ended up realizing that it was a lot more complicated than he realized. And so, to be honest, it sounds like that's something that may have been dropped after Brian weighed in on it.
Okay, I'll give the author one more chance to show up on the next call, and if he does not, I'm gonna drop the topic entirely. I've noticed that the community poll is adding a proposal, but the proposal should be turned into a CAP against enhancements repository. So if you got a chance to talk with him, I'll probably leave a comment in a PR asking him to move over to CAP so that we can continue the usual enhancements proposals process.
Got it.
Okay, so we're gonna drop this one and move on to the next one. Improvements in troubleshooting using ephemeral containers. Verb, I see someone with that nick on the participants list, so take it away.
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me? Okay,
Loud and clear.
great. So 116, we'll have the initial release of ephemeral containers, which is an ability. It's a feature that allows running a container in an existing pod for purposes of things like troubleshooting. It's still early days for this feature, but I wanted to start a conversation with SIG CLI about how this could be used in kubectl to sort of improve the options for debugging. The specific use case that I'm targeting here is the ability to troubleshoot distroless containers. So I linked a little demo there. You can either, I don't know if it'd be better to sort of play it now or to just let everyone take a look at it on their own. So what do you think?
So just some context. So I asked Lee to come and give us, the rest of the SIG CLI community, some more info and context on this ephemeral containers. I've already reviewed several of the PRs, and they're, as far as kubectl goes, they're very straightforward. And the ephemeral containers attribute within pods was added over a year ago, so any references to that are actually pretty safe. Yeah, so that's all I have to say.
So, sorry, to clarify on that a little bit, the initial PR was over a year ago. It only merged for 116.
Okay, gotcha. Can I play and you'll be
no, I'll actually just be talking because this is a whole ASCII thing. There's no sound.
Okay.
So this is a sort of a demo of how I see it working, and implemented using a plugin that I sort of wrote that was just a kind of quick proof of concept. So here we are just creating a normal pod, like a naked pod. You wouldn't do this, of course, but I need an example. So here we are. We're running an app. Shared process namespace is actually pretty important right now because a lot of the utility here comes, since this is another container in an existing pod, sharing the process namespace means that we can actually inspect the processes in the other containers. So here's my example little app. It just starts a web server and connects to a database. And then it failed, of course, because otherwise it would be a really boring demo. Uh-oh, we scrolled off the bottom. There we are. So this container isn't actually running, right? It errors, but we can still, well, eventually. I did not make up this error message. It really said server misbehaving when it can't connect to the database. So this is how I see it working. It's like kubectl exec, only we specify a container image, and then it runs a new container. As a PS, the other container isn't actually running, so all we have is the pause container. Also, I didn't make this up. Ping said try again. So MySQL doesn't resolve. So I'll just jump out of this debug container and realize that I never created my service for the database. Create my service, delete the pod, and recreate it, and it'll magically work. So this is an improvement over exec because the container doesn't actually need to be running. And then also, it works for distroless containers because you don't need to actually have a shell, which is the thing that we'll see next. So this is where share process namespace comes in. We can actually see the app running there, PID6. We can do things like resolve. And I'm in the network namespace. And that's it.
It couldn't copy files out, could it?
You could use it to run an agent inside the container, right? Like if you wanted to run a tar listening to standard in or something, like if tar didn't already exist in the container. That's possible, though it would be a little bit tricky because of the way that the mount namespaces work.
So Lee, just a quick update. So the actual ephemeral containers in core v1 types.go, that wasn't merged until 1.16?
That's correct.
Okay. So there may be an issue then with any of the code in 1.16 for kubectl that's referencing that. We have a support window, a version skew policy that allows us to understand plus and minus one release. And so I may have to revisit some of those reviews. I had thought that the ephemeral containers had been added to the types.go earlier than 1.16.
I mean, any pod fetched from a 1.15 API server, if kubectl is dealing with it as a typed pod object, will just have a zero-length list of ephemeral containers. So it would behave from kubectl's perspective like a normal pod that someone hadn't added an ephemeral container to.
Okay, and if there's code that references the spec.ephemeral containers, that's not going to be a problem?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, just the only thing that we changed in 1.16 for kubectl is there were a couple of sections that iterate through the containers, like attach and one of the logs, and so we had to update those to also iterate the ephemeral containers. And then I added something to print out the ephemeral containers in kubectl can just describe. But that's all we've changed so far. So if the ephemeral container is created by some other process, then kubectl will allow you to sort of interact with that container starting in 1.16. And then I also opened up this KEP about how we could support an ephemeral container debugging experience.
Thanks for coming by, Lee. That was useful.
Yeah, happy to do it. I'm excited to be able to work on this feature in kube control.
Is this in the crew index of default plugins?
No, I wanted to talk to you about that. So the SIG docs ask that I document this, including a task of how to use it, and they're okay. I just published this prototype plugin, and they're okay with just referring to that under my personal GitHub. If we're going to do it in the official documentation, I'd kind of prefer it live in like a Kubernetes SIG repo somewhere, either in CLI experimental or a new repo. So asking opinions on that.
We talked about making a repo for plugins that we endorse, but and it could potentially be upstreamed, but but are being released as plugins first. Maybe this would tick off that.
Yeah, I'd also be happy, we could add it to CLI experimental just as a separate build target or something. I'm sure we can work something out.
I think that's fine. Putting it in CLI experimental seems like the most straightforward next step. And then from there, we can figure out if if we can create like a just CLI-plugins for hosting plugins we create, or if we want to do something else.
Okay. So I'll prepare a PR for experimental then. And I'm working on the docs right now for the 116 docs.
Great. What do you, and was your ask that this be considered as part of core kube control, or are you just demonstrating it?
I think this should be part of core kube control. I think it fits in with the streaming commands.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Maybe if you put in experimental, try and get in a plugin first, just so it's available to everyone. The kube control libraries send headers that record which command is being run, so we can. It doesn't include any like PII or any values of flags or arguments, but it does include the command. So we should check if this is. You should check if you are doing that in your plugin as well, and if you are, then we might be able to get users to tell us or we might be able to give users a way for them to tell us how they're using them in their clusters.
Are we collecting analytics right now? Like the commands, has that started?
I'm not aware of it. Maybe some people are doing something with the information, but I'm not aware of anyone doing anything yet. Something we should probably talk about. That stuff isn't sent anywhere besides it's just a header to the API server and the request. So the only person who has access to that is the owner of the API server.
Ideally, we could have a metric inside the API server that will expose that information that we can then collect and be able to provide that kind of metrics based on the actual usage.
Yeah, if there's some way, it would be great if we could have some way of aggregating that and just say like, here's the commands by, percent of clusters running them versus, percent of commands run. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting stuff that we could use to make decisions such as how important is copy.
I know that there's been some interest from the distro containers effort for the Kubernetes containers for this functionality. I don't know if that sort of points towards it, makes it a stronger argument for it being a built-in.
Yeah, maybe. Certainly if people are asking for it. and they have a specific problem they are trying to solve with it, then that is much better than it being purely theoretic. Cool. Okay, thanks. Let's start with those next steps then, and then we can follow up on where we go from there.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for presenting, and thanks for this hard work. It's great.
Yeah,
Okay,
cool demo.
perfect. Does anyone have any questions to Lee with regards to kubectl debug command or the ephemeral containers overall? Okay, hearing none. In that case, we can jump over to the stand-ups. I see Kui and crew, so take it away.
Should Customize go first?
Yeah, go ahead. I haven't seen Customize being added, but if
okay.
Customize wants to report,
All right, I will
they
go
can
with crew. So we recently added a security notice about untrusted plugins, as we discussed before. And we're getting towards like a 0.3 release. We had our last release in October. Actually, we've been working pretty reliably since then. We didn't make a release and no one realized, so that's good. And the centralized plugin index is growing. We hit like over 50 plugins. So that's the crew update.
Okay. Nick, want to add something about Kui?
Yeah, sorry about that. We were on mute there. Yeah, so we've been on this, continuing the huge stability push up until next Friday. This coming Friday will be just very heads down stabilizing for an internal push. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that part of that we've had some design help that you might want to. I'll check it out. I can post some blogs on it. Experimenting with sort of changing the CLI input metaphor to have a single input rather than an input in a conventional CLI. There's some interesting possibilities that we've been experimenting with. We'll blog about that soon. So until next Friday, it'll be boring stabilization stuff.
Okay, thanks. Customize? Phil?
Sure, I'll just add one thing. Something we've been talking about is being able to do higher fidelity processing with YAML files where we keep comments, keep file structure, can write, if we build it, it's possible to write it back to a set of files and retain the original names and ordering of all the elements and that sort of thing. So this would allow other tools, right, to run customized build and then maybe do some operations on that, on the output of that, and then write it back to a set of files that could be more easily reviewed or that sort of thing. So if this is interesting to you, let us know.
So I have considered some of those, like how to keeping the file information or keeping the directory structure and the output. And I can give those informations, and I will plan to open some issues for this request, and I can give more information on those issues.
Okay, perfect.
Customize, so currently we are fixing some bugs, and once those are done, we'll release a new version.
Okay, and lastly, kubectl independence, Sean?
So not much has changed. As I mentioned before, we've got about 95% of the Go code into staging. The 3 remaining commands are git, convert, and auth reconcile that have dependencies on Kubernetes core that still need to be worked on. And with Jordan's help, I've been able to continue to do some refactorings to get so that the git command can be, the dependency in the git command can be removed. We're actually pretty close to that one, and but it won't land for 116. Not that it matters. Thanks, Jordan, for reviewing that code. And yeah, that's it for kubectl independence. Maybe in next week's meeting, I'm going to try to enumerate all of the kind of initiatives in order to not just get the code into staging, but out of staging and into its own repo. And this is going to include creating a new integration test framework, which we have some good ideas on, creating those actual integration tests, and other kind of tying up loose ends in order to not just get the kubectl code into staging, but get it also out and into its own repo. And we hope to do that in a couple of releases. There's already some PRs that are happening to refactor the code that's been put in staging. So now that we have kubectl code in staging, it is useful to be vendored and to be reused. And so, for instance, Justin Santa Barbara just merged a PR that refactored the drain code so that the drain code within kubectl could be reused elsewhere. And so I believe that there's going to be efforts along that same line, or to refactor the kubectl code to make it more reusable. In fact, one of those is going to be reusing some of the kubectl code that modifies the kube config file. So there's other plugins, for example, that might want to add entries within the kube config file. We want to make that a clean interface so that that's easy to do. Okay, that was long-winded. Any questions?
Awesome. I'm very happy about the moves with kubectl and the fact that people are working towards reusability of the elements of the kubectl. With regards to config manipulation, I'm inclined to say that this kind of functionality could even migrate its way towards CLI runtime. Yep. as rather core type of functionality that people writing CLIs for kubectl could reuse.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, okay. I guess at this point in time, we can wrap up our today's meeting, unless there are some other general thoughts, issues, questions that people have. Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much. It was nice seeing you again, and see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.